live from Whitney Media, 1460 WVOX, the Greenberg Report with Greenberg Town Supervisor Paul Feiner. You can join in the conversation at 914-636-0110. Now on 1460 WVOX, here's Greenberg Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
We have an interesting show today. I'm waiting for my guests to arrive, but I have a lot to report until that happens. We were really very excited. Greenberg set up a program called the COVID Angels, and we have over 180 volunteers, and the volunteers are reaching out to a few thousand seniors who reside in the town of Greenberg, and we're trying to help them navigate the COVID vaccination process. It's very hard to get an appointment, although I think it's starting to get easier. And our COVID Angels, they were featured on Les Holt's nightly news on NBC just two nights ago. I've received calls and emails from not only residents of Greenberg and Westchester, but from people all over the United States that they are looking at implementing this initiative in their communities, from Texas to Utah to California, Georgia, Alabama, Florida, Maryland. It's really very exciting, and I'm really very pleased because I feel that Greenberg, we started something that will be replicated elsewhere. In one day, the Greenberg COVID Angel volunteers, they were able to help 50 people, get vaccinations. We're going to be reaching out to our volunteers, and we'll get a better assessment as to the success of their successes in the coming weeks. They are all getting training from our committee, and we're going to be compiling a brochure which we'll be distributing to the municipal leaders around the country, because it's important that people who get vaccines, people who want vaccines, be able to get it. I had a very interesting situation. A few days ago, I got a thank you letter from a resident of the town of Greenberg who said that he's a widower. He reached out to me a few days ago. We assigned him a COVID Angel. The COVID Angel was able to get him the vaccine. And then he emailed the COVID Angel, and he asked her if she'll be his Valentine. He's a widower, so it was really very, very nice and, heartwarming. Another thing that the town is doing that I'm pleased about is we're compiling a list of residents who can only get the vaccine if a home visit is made. Although the county and the state currently are not having home visits for those who need the COVID vaccines, there are people who are truly homebound with debilitating illnesses or disabilities, and they cannot leave their home, but for the most dire circumstances. So now my guest has arrived, and I'm just very, very pleased to welcome Cathy Sears. I had Cathy on my program in February of 2020, and she and her colleague Sarah Cox discussed an initiative about slavery in Irvington. I was thinking while I was driving here, this morning about Irvington and Greenberg. We are such a progressive, community, definitely among the bluest of the blue communities in the nation. But when Abraham Lincoln was president, Irvington was pretty conservative and actually was pro-slavery. Is that true, Cathy?
Yes, well, in general.
I'm sorry. So why don't we talk about that in about 5 minutes right after the break's over?
Great.
Okay, I'm Paul Feiner, Greenberg Town Supervisor. We'll be right back, and we have a really interesting program with Cathy Sears, and we're going to be talking about an exciting initiative that they're working on in Irvington.
WVOX. Now back to the Greenberg Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenberg Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
I'm the Greenberg Town Supervisor, and my guest today, Cathy Sears, and she's going to be talking about a very interesting initiative happening in Irvington. Before the break, we were talking about slavery a little bit and Irvington's role. We were a northern state, and I was surprised that there were people in Irvington who actually were pro-slavery. Is that true?
Yes, I mean, this was common for all of Greenberg, all of the lower Hudson Valley, because we were part of Phillipsburg Manor, the breadbasket for the Caribbean, and enslaved people were also part of our community and helped build our historical villages and helped do the hard work and labor to provide that breadbasket to the Caribbean and to New York City. So it's location. We're still part of the New York City greater area, which was, if I can say, New York State was the capital of American slavery for more than 2 centuries. That is a profound point.
So when was the last when did we sort of end the distinction of having slaves in Greenberg?
Well, we follow really the whole state. So what you're going to find is we have a really messy, torturous emancipation process in New York State. It was not like Lincoln saying, everyone's freed, you're fine. Ours was gradual. It was full of loopholes. It was a huge maze that started around 1785, and it went, supposedly everyone was supposed to be, in air quotes, free at 1827. But as John J. Justice Slavery Index points out, historians point out, that really took until about 1848 because of all these loopholes. It was gradual. Loopholes designed for enslavers to continue to benefit from people enslaved. So this is no different. And the Hudson Valley, all the way up to Albany, was enormously benefited by the use of enslaved people. So Greenberg, we're just now unweaving it, but we can talk about Irvington at this time. And no one was immune to slavery. It was there in front of your face. You were either brought into it and enslaved people, or your next-door neighbor enslaved people. And, we have data, actually. There's a New York State historian named Travis Bauman, and he really drilled down into the slave-owning data. And so, like, in 1698, half of Westchester enslaved people, okay? Then we looked, Sarah and I drilled down, 100 years later, we looked at Greenberg. 25% of households in 1790 either enslaved or had someone serving in servitude in bondage, which is quasi-slavery because of these insane, onerous laws that we enacted to so-called free people. So then when Sarah and I looked at 13 families in 17 50% of the families that we looked at enslaved people. So that was found. That was profound, and we found that even some of our founding families, including those who served in the Revolutionary War and beyond, owned 4 to 10 people in our community. And what's more, we also found that several of the names of our founding families are street names or notable people, and they also enslaved people or had been serving in servitude and bondage.
Right. Now, is that taught in the schools in Irvington, that somebody could be living on a street that used to be owned by a slave owner?
This is new news. We have a wonderful high school teacher who's an historian for our village, and he is very committed to changing the narrative. But this is new research to people, and particularly because Sarah Cox and I found original documents documenting names of 14 people out of the many that were not. And what's really wonderful right now is that school districts started a multi-year program through NYU, which was initiated by our local ETSA Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and they are helping all our schools, starting right this past school year, to help Irvington schools, teachers, and children adjust their curriculum and make the culture more racially inclusive. This is part of a larger, and there are even larger initiatives, which I can tell you about, which was in the Rivertown Enterprise just recently.
Wow. Now, you're going to be putting a plaque up recognizing the role of slaves?
Yeah, so here's what I can say to you, that, Sarah and I have been doing research for 4 years plus. We put out a journal article. We've been doing presentations, and at each presentation, Sarah manned a desk. And we began to form a committee, and it is chaired, and the visionary person behind it is Sarah Cox. And it was called the Commemorating Enslaved Africans Committee. And it was formed to sort of fine-tune a proposal to seek village approval for public art, plaques, and community education to honor the legacy of the enslaved Africans who built our village. And so now that all that hard work has come to is almost on the cusp of coming to fruition. Can I tell you some more about it?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. The Rivertown Enterprise came out February 5th, covering this very well if everyone wants to get a copy of it. But I can tell you our byline is it's who tells your story. So what I can say is the story we tell ourselves about Irvington is changing. We're becoming more racially inclusive. Both literally.
We have to take a break again, and then we'll be back in about 3 or 4 minutes. And we're going to talk about slavery, commemorating the role the slaves played in building up Irvington, and we're going to be talking with Cathy Sears in just a few minutes, so please stay tuned.
WVOX. Now back to the Greenberg Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenberg Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
This is really a fascinating, program, and I just wanted to ask, Cathy, if you could just elaborate a little bit more about, what we're doing right now in terms of.
Sure.
honoring those people who were slaves.
Yes, if I can just back up, you asked me very specific about Greenberg, and I have found, slavery going back to 1700s all the way, late 1600s, but all the way through 1830s and even 1850, vestiges of it, of this, which I had discussed earlier, which was this maze of our sordid gradual emancipation process. Now, let me talk about Irvington. So what is happening is that the Commemorating Enslaved Africans in Irvington project, which features artwork by the noted sculptor Vinnie Bagwell, is close to final approval in Irvington. So what does that mean? It means that the committee presented a proposal to local authorities, and that includes the school district, the Board of Education, and they approved the location of what is going to be a bronze bas-relief and a plaque on the grounds of the Main Street School on our Main Street. And then earlier, the village trustees approved the burial ground plaque, a burial ground plaque, and a memorial garden and benches for what was a former enslaved African burial ground. Now, the final vote still has to happen with all the I's dotted and the T's crossed, contracts signed by the Board of Education. They have to still vote finally on this, and then contracts have to be signed. But fundraising is well underway. We have already raised over $6,000.
How much will the whole thing be?
We really can't say now because there has to be until a contract is signed with Vinnie Bagwell, whose sculpture is known throughout the United States. There is the unveiling, installation. There is the upkeep, the maintenance, the gardens. A lot of things have to be figured out. So we're not there yet on a final amount. But we have raised well over $6,000, basically on the day that the proposal was presented to the school district and Board of Education. So, and as I mentioned, Vinnie Bagwell, her sculptures are known throughout the United States, and she is not only a sculptor, she's an activist, she's an educator, and so will be involved in some of our programming. And she has done her own conception and project. The Enslaved Africans Rain Garden is set to open in downtown Yonkers this spring. And you can also see Sojourner Truth up in Poughkeepsie right now, along with Ella Fitzgerald in Yonkers. So she's known everywhere. So meanwhile, this project also includes civil engagement, education, student-led tours, and our committee, led by Cox, is really looking forward to this real great relationship with the Board of Ed, the PCSA Diversity Inclusion Committee, the Irvington Education Fund, and the community on the subject of restoring the history and honoring the humanity and contributions of the enslaved men, women, and children who helped build our town.
Are there many communities in the United States that are doing similar things?
I think there are various ways of artwork and things that have honored enslaved people. I know the Stepping Stones Project, which is in Connecticut, it's based on the stones that have the name of, in this case, it would be the enslaved person, where they lived or worked, and information about them. And that's like what was done in Europe for people who were part of the genocide, and names there. Hold on, let me just see. Are you still there? Sorry. So, are you there? Yes, you're there. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm there.
Okay, I'm sorry. So there's stones. Also, up at Phillipsburg Manor, there are stones in a certain formation honoring the named enslaved people there. So there are different things that are going on. You'll see a lot of communities will have information up on their Historical Society website about slavery. Tarrytown has really great information, too, about their history and contributions of the Black community as well. So there are lots of things going on, and it's really been propelled also the 1619 Project by the New York Times, Black Lives Matter. There's so much more scholarship and engagement going on and acknowledging our history and legacy of enslaving people and honoring them and opening up our history and the perspective of history, of who tells that story. It's no longer just white males in books. It's all of it.
Right. One of the questions I had, you said that, the slaves actually helped build, Irvington. Although slavery existed, a while back, and Irvington is a charming, quaint community. Are there any buildings right now that are still up that possibly were built by slaves?
No, this is not literally the town you see right now. In the late 1600s, this was deep forest with wild animals and streams and heavily forested area. And so when the Dutch came in, these were land grants, and then Frederick Phillips bought up, he was Dutch, and then he became a loyalist. He bought up all of the land from Spuyten-Duyvil all the way up to Croton, and it was this big manor land, and then he brought in tenant farmers. And the enslaved people came in, and they had to do both skilled and a variety of unskilled labor. They had to clear the forest, which was an enormous project. They had to plant the fields, plant orchards, till the land, the building and stuff. We don't have the specifics about what they did, but they certainly helped lay the groundwork of making this a settlement, and a very wealthy settlement from the very, very beginning. Several of our founding families were very well off because this was rich land along the Hudson River, and their farms. They later, after the Revolutionary War, Phillips, who was a loyalist, hightailed it off to Europe, and these Revolutionary War patriots and tenant farmers were able to purchase this land, and many of them stayed for decades in this area, passing on land to their other descendants or buying other property and so on. Unfortunately, enslaved people were not granted those same rights.
We have to take another break, and we'll be right back. And we're talking with Cathy Sears about slavery in Irvington and their initiative to commemorate the contributions enslaved Africans made to the community.
WVOX. Now back to the Greenberg Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenberg Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Paul Feiner. I'm the Greenberg Town Supervisor, and we're having a really interesting program with Cathy Sears, and we're talking about slavery in Irvington and a really exciting initiative where they're going to be honoring the contributions enslaved Africans made to the village of Irvington when slavery was part of the community. And I wanted to ask Cathy if there's any grants that your organization has gotten from either the Council of the Arts or Arts Westchester or the National Trust for Historic Preservation or any other organizations?
Do you know there is actually someone writing grants at this very moment? So that's part of the initiative. Yes, so that's happening.
Right.
I don't know exactly to whom the grants are being written, but they are.
Do you feel that this commemoration will become just like a local destination point, or do you think it could become part of historic Hudson's history initiatives?
Well, we're, I think, tied just because we Historic Hudson Valley's organization, which runs Phillipsburg Manor, Upper Mill site, and then Cortland Manor, et cetera, we're tied to them historically. But I think we're part of a larger initiative that's going forward. We hope to be part of, like, I may not have the title right, the African American Historical Trail and other destinations where people can come and see, go to this graveyard, which actually we think was a significant place because Jan Buckout was an incredibly wealthy Dutch tenant farmer, and he was the third wealthiest in the Upper Mills in like 1732. And the reports of him having this graveyard, which we're going to honor with memorial garden and benches and plaques, it really was a significant area due to the research we found over the time periods like 1895, they discovered remains, and in 1928, they discovered more remains of this burial ground. And so that was significant. And also I can say that because of this really gradual emancipation process, people were enslaved. They might be free, but their kids were still serving, or the husband or the father was still serving in households and on tenant farms or in the village. They were still serving within homes, serving contractually for free because they had the contract of servitude and bondage. In fact, and this goes on to we found evidence 1825 with the Odells having enslaved people, and most notably, we have, let me just find it, it was, this is one of our founding families, but it is Justice Dearman came into town, and he bought like part of the Dutcher farm, and which included Matheson Park in the center of Irvington. And his family, from census records, shows an enslaved person in that household in New York City. And then in Greenburgh, it shows in 1820 and 1830, within that household, Dearman had a free colored person, a boy, who was most likely completing his required servitude. He doesn't show up in the 1830s, so we believe that he had reached the age where he was finally free. So, when people were here and what freedom meant is really, people were still serving in bondage and servitude for a period of time. 1840s, and you saw changes into Irish immigrants and other immigrants coming in to serve. But the impact was the same throughout our area in New York State because of Jim Crow-like laws that began way back in the 1700s, late 1600s, and considered and moved forward into the present day that have legacy, and that these Jim Crow laws that have legacy now in inequities in housing, where you lived, where you went to school, where you could buy a home. So these all have legacies and important strings of major importance today that are now being talked about.
One of the every time I speak to you, or hear you make a presentation, I'm so fascinated by your knowledge and how you just make history come alive. And I'm wondering what got you interested.
I was a former science and health reporter. I did some local arts reporting here. But I think I've moved around a lot in my life. And I've always had, okay, what is my sense of place? And so when I moved onto Buckout Street, I said, who's Buckout? Who's Buckout? And the same thing with Sarah. Sarah is a history nerd, too, like me. But I think everyone wants to have a sense of place. So it was like, what's that name there? And why is it there? So mine was coming at it through a sense of history of like why Buckout, and then I and Sarah, we attended a lecture by an author who's a descendant of the Buckout Jewell family who lived here from like 1708 to 1850s, and he talked about the graveyard. He talked about enslaved people, and I was like, whoa! And of course, everyone is, if I can use the word, being woke by what's happening in our country, the dialogue, the books that are being written that are talking about our history from not one perspective, but many perspectives and many different voices. So, and it's just all sort of come together. And now with Black Lives Matter and even our own community, I have to give a shout out to our school superintendent and to our mayor, Brian Smith. They have these like monthly Zooms that our community could come into and discuss racial inequalities, and it was very eye-opening and profound. And it's still going to go on, and that just makes it so wonderful to live here. I feel so privileged.
Right. It's really great. If somebody wants to be involved in the committee, we just have like a minute left. How could they do so? And could you again give us like is there like an estimated time period when the commemoration will be complete and when people will be able to visit the site?
Sarah Cox is saying about a year. I think the sculptor Vinnie Bagwell knows too the extent and time length can vary for projects such as this, but Cox has said about a year. So I guess in about a year we'll be talking about this and see and invite people to come to Irvington and actually see and also participate in civic dialogue, be part of the student-led tours, etc. I think I'm going to have to ask Sarah about I think a website is being set up as we speak, the Commemorating Enslaved Africans Committee. It includes people from the Irvington activist group, if you're familiar with that. And I'll see about passing on to you an immediate link for people who are interested in talking to the committee and Sarah and myself. And I'm happy to do that.
We ran out of time, and I really appreciate everything you're doing. I'm Paul Feiner, Greenberg Town Supervisor. Thank you.